You know, Laura, women your age really shouldn't try that hard. It just looks desperate. Paul said that once, with a smirk so casual it felt almost harmless. Almost. But that sentence, tossed out like a crumpled napkin, would later echo in her mind as the moment she should have realized something inside him had already started to rot. Laura, 41 years old and a stay-at-home mother in a quiet suburb outside Portland, had never imagined her life would twist into something this dark. For 2 decades, she believed her marriage to Paul, 48, polished, successful, charismatic in that Wall Street wannabe kind of way, was stable, maybe even enviable from the outside. They had built a home together, raised 2 children together, and survived enough fights, financial dips, and late-night arguments to believe nothing could threaten what they had left. Their son Eric, freshly 18, was the type of boy every mother prayed for, thoughtful, soft-spoken, and deeply loyal. Their daughter Mary, 15, was bright, cautious, perceptive. She had Paul's sharp eyes, but Laura's quiet sensitivity. And then there was Amy, 18, Eric's first real girlfriend. The girl who had been coming over since freshman year. The girl who practically grew up in their living room. The girl Laura could never imagine hurting anyone. Amy wasn't just Eric's girlfriend. She was the one who stayed for dinner even on school nights. The one who confided in Laura about college fears. The one who called her Mrs. Carter, with a smile so sweet it softened every rough edge of adolescence. Laura had slipped into loving the girl the way a mother loves anyone who loves her son. And maybe that was why everything hurt so much more. The truth didn't break Laura all at once. It seeped into her life like cold water under a locked door, slow, quiet, unnoticed until it flooded everything. Her marriage had been cooling for years, though she hated admitting that out loud. Paul worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, came home emotionally absent. She used to blame the distance on work stress, on aging, on the natural erosion of passion. She tried to understand it, tolerate it, even excuse it. She told herself every long-term marriage went through dull seasons. But then came the things she couldn't explain away. The shift began right around Amy's 18th birthday. Laura hadn't connected the dots at the time, and the guilt of that still sat heavy in her chest. Paul started acting different, restless, jittery, defensive about nothing, more secretive with his phone, more critical of Laura's appearance, her clothes, her hair, even the way she walked. It wasn't constant. That would have been easier to notice. It came in flashes, in bursts of irritation that faded into moments of suspicious silence. And then came the first real warning sign. The one she buried under so much denial, she felt sick remembering it. A thong. A tiny, lace, black thong tucked under the edge of the bed. It wasn't hers. It definitely wasn't Mary's. But Laura, trembling, staring at the piece of fabric that did not belong in her home, told herself a story so absurd she almost laughed now. Maybe it was laundry from Eric's room. Maybe Mary had bought something on a dare. Maybe, there was some reasonable explanation. But the truth is, her heart had known long before her mind allowed her to accept it. She ignored that sign. She tucked it away, literally and emotionally. And the universe, almost offended by her refusal to acknowledge what was happening, threw something at her she couldn't ignore. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Paul stood in the kitchen scrolling through his phone. He wasn't texting, at least not visibly. He was closing apps, the way he always compulsively swept through them. But when he swiped upward, clearing the screen back to the home display, Laura caught a glimpse of something blue and white. The iMessage window, still open in the background. She hadn't meant to look. God, she replayed that moment over and over, reminding herself she hadn't been snooping. She had simply seen it, a preview of a message no wife should ever see. I miss eating your sausage, Amy had written, with a winking emoji, a heart, and then, you better save some for me. Laura froze, not metaphorically, not poetically, physically, like her brain short-circuited and her body forgot how to breathe. She stood there, her hand still hovering near the coffee pot, staring at the glowing screen that had just cracked her world open. Paul noticed her silence, glanced up casually, and locked his phone without a flicker of panic. Either he didn't realize what she'd seen, or he didn't care. She wanted to believe she misunderstood. She wanted, desperately, to believe she hallucinated. For the rest of the day, she replayed the text in her mind, editing it, rephrasing it, trying trying to convince herself it said something else. Something innocent. Something that didn't involve an 18-year-old girl and her 48-year-old husband. But denial can only survive for so long when the truth is pounding on the door. That night, when Paul went to shower, Laura's trembling fingers found his laptop. She didn't know exactly what she was searching for. She told herself she needed clarity. Proof. Maybe even reassurance that she was wrong. What she found instead was the first layer of hell. A folder on his desktop, harmlessly named Work Docs, filled with explicit BDSM content. Dozens of videos. Hundreds of images. Tabs still open from sites she didn't even know existed. Purchases for OnlyFans creators. Young. Too young. The receipts sitting neatly in his email. Then another folder. Hidden behind a password she cracked far too easily. Inside were photos of Amy. Not nude ones. Not sexual ones. Just pictures. Screenshots from her Instagram. Downloaded images. Saved selfies. Photos she posted with Eric. Photos she posted alone. Fully clothed. Smiling. Laughing. Existing. And somehow, that made it worse. This wasn't just lust. It was obsession. It was grooming. It was a man carefully, methodically studying the girl who trusted him. Laura felt bile rise in her throat. The room tilted. She gripped the desk so hard her knuckles drained white. She knew, at that moment, that the text message had not been a mistake. She had not misread anything. Her husband, the father of her children, was sleeping with her son's girlfriend. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just stood there, hollowed out, as if her entire body had cracked but hadn't yet fallen apart. And yet, even then, what hurt the most wasn't the porn. Wasn't the photos. Wasn't the text about his sausage. It was the realization that the betrayal was deeper than flesh. It was personal, cruel, and deliberate. Because what she would discover next, what she would read in those messages, what she would hear them say about her, the woman who had fed them, cared for them, trusted them, would carve a wound far more painful than the affair itself. And that was the beginning of the unraveling, the moment everything started to fall apart. Because what waited for her in the next messages wasn't just infidelity. It was humiliation. But the worst part, she would later think, wasn't that they were together. It was that they spoke about me like I wasn't even human. And that is where the real nightmare began. And so, after standing in front of that laptop in stunned silence, Laura did the only thing a person does when denial finally loses its grip. She kept reading. She scrolled deeper, further, letting the truth swallow her whole. Part of her already knew there was no going back. Part of her still hoped there might be some impossible mistake. But when the next messages loaded, any remaining illusions collapsed. The thread between Paul and Amy wasn't short. It wasn't vague. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a window into two people who had carved her out of their lives long before she understood what was happening. The first message she opened wasn't sexual. It was worse. Paul had written, "She tried that dress again last night. I swear she looked like a sausage ready to burst." And underneath it, almost instantly, Amy replied, No, OMG, stop. Why does she always try to dress young? It's kinda sad." A trail of laughing emojis. A heart. Comfortable cruelty. Laura felt her breath catch. Her mind tried to protect itself, tried to disbelieve the words glowing on the screen. But the conversation went on, line after line, confirming every insecurity she had confided to Paul over the years. The weight she struggled to lose after 2 pregnancies. The wrinkles she was trying to accept. The exhaustion she carried from running their home while he built his career. He took each of those quiet confessions and tossed them to Amy like scraps for entertainment. "She's slow," Paul wrote in another message. "Like living in slow motion. She talks slow, walks slow, thinks slow." Amy answered with a LOL and added, "She sounds boring as hell. How do you not fall asleep?" Laura blinked hard, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. She forced herself to breathe. Every message felt like a punch she wasn't prepared for, a reminder that the man she'd built a family with didn't just betray her body, but her dignity, her identity, her entire sense of worth. And Amy, the girl she had cooked for, encouraged, defended, was laughing. They mocked her cooking, her voice, her hobbies, her laugh, her parenting, her age, even the way she cried during emotional movies. There was no mercy, no hesitation, just 2 people bonding over tearing her apart. Her eyes lifted from the screen, drifting to the hallway outside the office, to the family portraits lining the wall. There they were, smiling, arms around each other, faces full of warmth. Paul had always insisted on professional family photos every Christmas. A tradition, he said. Memories, he said. But now, staring between the glowing cruelty on the laptop and the still, perfect smiles on the wall, the contrast hit her like a physical blow. The photos looked like a life someone else lived. A life that never actually existed. She turned back to the messages, knowing she shouldn't continue, but unable to stop. Humans have a strange instinct when facing pain. Sometimes the only way to survive it is to look directly at it. More messages appeared. She tried flirting with me yesterday, Paul wrote, followed by a laughing emoji. It was pathetic. She's too old for that now. Amy responded, ew, OMG. I swear she still thinks she's in her 20s. You deserve someone who keeps up. Someone like you, Laura thought bitterly, though the thought hurt so sharply it made her chest tighten. As she scrolled, she began remembering things, small moments she had brushed off without knowing why they bothered her. The way Paul always asked Amy about school, her future, her friends, in a tone he never used with his own daughter. The way he lit up when Amy laughed at his jokes, basking in the admiration of someone young and naive. The way he lingered too long in the doorway when Amy visited, insisting on driving her home even when it was out of the way. The whispered conversations she had assumed were harmless. The inside jokes she didn't understand. The too warm smiles. Memories came back like puzzle pieces suddenly falling into place, and the picture they formed made her stomach churn. The betrayal wasn't a single moment. It was years of grooming, manipulation, and slowly shifting boundaries while she looked the other way, trusting him, trusting her. Amy had been 14 when she first started visiting their house, and the thought of that made Laura's knees weaken. But the emotional pain wasn't one-sided. It wasn't just Paul who pierced her heart. It was Amy's words, sharp, casual, dripping with the kind of cruelty only the young and selfish can wield without fully understanding the damage. Laura had loved that girl, protected her, welcomed her. She had let her sit on her kitchen counter eating cookie dough straight from the bowl. She had driven her home late at night after study sessions. She had helped her pick a prom dress. She had given her advice about college applications. And now here Amy was, using every kindness as material for ridicule. What hurt most wasn't the judgment, it was the joy. Amy enjoyed mocking her. She delighted in it. And Paul encouraged it. The betrayal doubled, tripled, branched into something so ugly Laura didn't know how to hold it inside her chest. Her heart clenched at one thought above all, Eric. Her son. Her gentle, soft-hearted, loyal boy. He adored Amy. He believed she was his first love, maybe even his forever. What would this do to him? How would he survive the shattering of both his relationship and his view of his own father? Laura felt fear rise in her throat, not for herself this time, but for her child. She imagined Eric's face when he learned the truth, imagined the confusion, the heartbreak, the anger. She thought of Mary too, quiet and perceptive, connecting dots faster than anyone expected. This wasn't just a marital collapse. It would tear through the entire family like a storm. Laura closed the laptop, but the silence in the room felt louder than any scream. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She stared at the blank screen, feeling the weight of 2 decades pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't unsee it. She couldn't unknow it. She couldn't pretend anymore. For a long moment, she stood there, hands trembling, breath shallow, body numb. Then something inside her shifted. Not anger. Not even grief. Resolve. Cold, clear, methodical resolve. She whispered to the empty room, her voice barely audible. Enough. And that was the moment the dynamic changed. The moment she stopped being the woman stumbling in the dark and became the woman preparing for the truth. She reopened the laptop. This time, not as a wife desperate to understand, but as someone who needed evidence. Screenshots, photos, downloaded copies of messages, call logs, everything she could possibly gather. Because the moment the truth becomes too big to run from, you stop running. You start documenting. You start preparing. You start protecting the people you love. And that is exactly what Laura did. But she had no idea that the deeper she dug, the darker it would become, and that this was only the beginning of exposing how far Paul and Amy had already gone. The moment Laura started collecting evidence, something inside her shifted. Her hands still shook, yes, but her mind, her mind had never been clearer. The chaos of her emotions faded into something cold, steady, and strangely quiet. It was the kind of silence a person feels right before a storm, not fear, but focus. And that's exactly where part 3 begins. She moved like a person who already knew the truth, but needed the facts documented in a way no one could deny. The laptop screen reflected her face, pale, drawn, but determined, as she dug deeper into Paul's digital life. The iCloud backups were first. 3 months' worth of messages synced automatically, enough to paint a picture no lawyer could ignore. She downloaded every conversation between Paul and Amy, saving them in neatly labeled folders. She wasn't angry while doing it. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shaking anymore. She just worked. Then came the call logs. Hours-long phone conversations between Paul and Amy, sometimes starting at midnight, sometimes in the middle of the day when he claimed to be in meetings. Scrolling through each entry felt like peeling off a layer of skin, but she kept going, documenting everything with the precision of someone preparing for war. When she opened his dating apps, she didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She simply stared. Profiles on multiple apps. Preferences set specifically to filter girls aged 18 to 22. Dozens of active chats with college girls, baristas, recent high school graduates. His photos were edited, filtered, designed to make him appear younger, more vibrant. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a pattern, a lifestyle. And when she looked through his purchase history, the sickness in her stomach returned, but just for a moment. There it was, monthly charges to OnlyFans, some as high as a few $100s. Receipts for subscriptions, tips, paid messages. Then the hidden drawer. She found it while searching the closet, hands moving faster than her thoughts. Inside was a collection of sex toys, lubricants, ropes, blindfolds, and 2 outfits. One a pleated schoolgirl uniform, the other a short French-maid costume. That was when her breath hitched, not because of the items themselves, but because she suddenly pictured Amy. 18. Impressionable. Confused. Not old enough to understand the consequences of a man like Paul. And yet, even then, the tears did not come. She closed the drawer, stood up, and walked out of the room. Her next step was the hardest one, waking the kids. It was already late. The house felt heavy, dark, suffocating, as though the walls themselves knew what was about to happen. Eric and Mary sat on the couch, their faces tired, waiting for her to explain why she had pulled them from their rooms with such urgency. Laura sat across from them, clasping her hands so tightly her knuckles burned white. Her voice came out soft at first, but steady. There's something you both need to know. And I'm so sorry I have to be the one to tell you. Mary was the first to react. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing, already sensing the shape of the truth before hearing it. Eric, on the other hand, looked calm, too calm, like a boy bracing for a blow he didn't yet understand. Laura told them everything. Slowly, carefully. She didn't hide details, but she didn't sensationalize them either. She explained the messages, the photos, the calls. She explained the betrayal. Eric didn't speak. Not one word. His face emptied, drained of life, of color. He stared at the floor like he was trying to understand how the world could tilt so violently without warning. His jaw clenched only once. Barely. But that small movement broke Laura's heart more than any tears could have. Mary, though. Mary erupted. Her anger crackled like electricity. Her voice rose, sharp and furious, each word fueled by betrayal. She cursed Paul, cursed Amy, cursed the cruelty of the entire situation. How could he do that? How could she do that? She sat at our table. She pretended she cared about us, about you, Mom, about Eric, and she was doing this the whole time? Mary trembled as she spoke, fists balled tight. She wasn't just angry, she was devastated. And in that moment, her maturity, her protectiveness, her sheer outrage made Laura realize how much her daughter had grown. How much this moment would harden her. They left the house that night. Laura didn't take much, just essential bags, the files on a flash drive, and the children. She drove straight to her brother Daniel's home. He opened the door before she even knocked twice, saw her face, saw the kids, and didn't ask a single question. That was family. The next morning brought another storm, one Laura couldn't avoid. She sat across from Amy's mother, a woman who looked 10 years older than she had last week, exhaustion hanging off her like a weighted coat. Amy had already been confronted by her mother the night before. And according to the woman sitting across from Laura, the confrontation was a disaster. Amy cried, screamed, insisted she and Paul were in love, said Laura was trying to ruin their relationship, believed she was the victim, that everyone was tearing her away from the only person who understood her. She said she'd run away with him, Amy's mother whispered. That she's 18 now, so no one can stop her. Laura swallowed the ache in her throat. Amy wasn't just manipulated. She was indoctrinated. Still, Amy's mother handed her the full chat log extracted from Amy's phone, confirming everything Laura already feared and more. 2 lives ruined. 2 families torn open. And then came the moment she had been dreading. The Zoom call. Her lawyer insisted on it. You need to confront him once, make your position clear, and document his reaction. So Laura logged in, hands steady, heart thrumming painfully, but not weakly. When Paul appeared on the screen, she barely recognized him. His face was flushed, almost red. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His breathing was shallow, erratic. His eyes were frantic, wild, darting everywhere but the camera. Paul, she began, her tone nearly emotionless. We need to talk about what's been happening. He interrupted immediately. You don't understand the context, he snapped, voice cracking with agitation. That's the problem. None of that happened the way you think. You're twisting things. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't argue. I have the screenshots. I have the chats. I have Amy's full message history. His expression shifted, fear, then rage. You're trying to take my kids away from me. You think you can just disappear with them? You think you have that right? His volume rose so quickly the microphone distorted. Laura flinched, not from fear of him, but from the sheer volatility radiating through the screen. Paul, she said, calm as stone, you need to stop yelling. I will not lose my family because you're being dramatic, he shouted. You don't get to destroy my life over some. He stopped there. His jaw clenched so hard she thought it might snap. Then his tone changed, lower, more dangerous. Tell me where you are. Right now. That was when she felt it, the shift. The truth she had been avoiding even after learning everything else. This wasn't a man who simply cheated. This was a man capable of real harm. Her voice came out quiet but firm. No, Paul slammed his fist against his desk, making the camera shake. You can't just hang up on me, Laura. Don't you dare end this call. But she already knew she would. I won't speak to you again without my lawyer present. And just like that, she ended the meeting. The silence afterward felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. She picked up the phone, dialed her attorney, and said the sentence she never imagined she would need. I need a restraining order. Immediately. Because now this wasn't about marriage. Or betrayal. Or humiliation. This was about safety. And yet, when she thought Paul had finally hit rock bottom, what happened next with Amy proved that things were about to get even worse. Paul's rage-filled Zoom call ended with a click, but the echo of his voice lingered inside Laura far longer than she expected. It was the sound of a man who finally realized he had lost control. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to relief. Not because things were over, but because she finally understood the truth. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't weak. She was in danger, and now she was choosing safety. That was the quiet bridge between part 3 and the beginning of the end. The protective order came faster than expected. Within 24 hours, Paul was legally barred from contacting her or the children. The court ordered him to pay temporary support, something his lawyer tried to fight, but ultimately couldn't. The evidence Laura's attorney submitted was so overwhelming that the judge barely looked at Paul's objections. Every message, every photo, every call log, every app. A paper trail that painted Paul exactly as he was, manipulative, predatory, and violent in ways that didn't require physical contact to be dangerous. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Her attorney called it one of the strongest cases she'd ever seen. And Laura could feel the shift happening, like a door closing behind her and a new one opening in front of her. But while the legal system began its work, the emotional aftermath hit the children. Therapy became a lifeline. Eric went first, reluctantly. He sat through 2 sessions in silence before finally cracking open, admitting he didn't understand how he could love someone who had betrayed him so profoundly. His therapist called it survivor-level heartbreak. Mary resisted at first, but after hearing her brother speak about his sessions, she agreed to consider it. Her anger had cooled into something sharper, awareness, suspicion, clarity. She didn't say much about her emotions, but Laura could feel the heaviness around her daughter like a constant hum. And then came the conversation that chilled Laura more than anything Paul had ever done. One of Mary's friends, a girl who had spent countless afternoons at their house years ago, confessed something quietly, almost apologetically. "Your dad used to stare at me," she said. "Sometimes he'd comment on my leggings, or the way they fit. I didn't know what to do, so I stopped coming over." Another girl came forward with a similar story. Then another. A pattern emerged, one that had been invisible to Laura until the moment the truth finally revealed itself. Paul had been like this for years. The realization was bitter, heavy, but it also strengthened her resolve. She wasn't dealing with a man who made a mistake. She was dealing with a man who preyed on vulnerability and used affection as a weapon. And then there was Amy. Her situation deteriorated rapidly. Within days, Amy was sneaking out at 3 in the morning, convinced she and Paul were soulmates. Her mother, exhausted and terrified, called Laura twice for advice she didn't know how to give. Amy truly believed no one understood them. She believed adults were jealous, threatened, controlling. She insisted the dating app profiles were photoshopped, that Paul would never do something like that. The damage was deeper than infidelity. It was dependency, grooming, emotional rewiring that started when she was 14 and too young to recognize the shape of a trap. Laura watched the confusion in Amy's eyes when she saw the printed screenshots of Paul's other conversations. The other girls his age range filter matched with. The shock, the denial, the horror. Amy had whispered, voice breaking. "He told me I was the only one. He said he waited 4 years for me to be old enough. I thought that meant something." Laura didn't hate her. Couldn't. Not after witnessing the complete collapse of a girl who thought she was in control of a man who had been manipulating her for years. Amy wasn't the villain. She was another casualty. Meanwhile, Paul's world began to crumble. His company placed him on leave. HR opened an investigation. The state reviewed the digital evidence Laura provided. And his attorney, once confident, began pushing for settlement rather than trial. The court of public opinion, especially in a professional field like his, wasn't kind. People whispered. Rumors spread. Clients pulled away. Supervisors questioned his conduct. And the more he tried to deny, the more the truth trapped him. For Laura, though, life slowly began to settle into something safer. She and the kids stayed at her brother's home, a warm, bustling place with too much noise and not enough privacy, but exactly the sense of security they needed. Every morning, she made coffee while the sun rose behind the trees. Every evening, she checked on the kids, sitting beside them until they fell asleep. She focused on healing, on rebuilding, on remembering that safety is not a luxury, it is a right. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she realized something startling. She no longer felt small. She no longer felt slow. She no longer felt like the boring, aging wife Paul tried to turn her into. She felt powerful. She had protected her children. She had broken a cycle. She had stepped out of the shadow of a man who thrived on diminishing her. Standing outside one evening, watching the sky shift from blue to gold, she thought about the 20 years she spent with him. 20 years of compromise, exhaustion, tiptoeing, shrinking, apologizing. 20 years of believing she needed to try harder, when the truth was that nothing she did would have changed a man who didn't want to be decent. She whispered to herself, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He never destroyed me. He just destroyed himself. The divorce would be finalized soon. Paul's investigation was still ongoing. Amy was still in therapy. The kids were healing. And Laura, she was breathing freely for the first time in decades. She wasn't naive. She knew healing wasn't linear. She knew there would be days she felt overwhelmed, afraid, or lonely. But she also knew herself now, fully, deeply, and without apology. And as she looked at her reflection in the window, hair messy, eyes tired, heart steady, she saw the truth. She wasn't the woman Paul mocked. She wasn't the weakness he preyed on. She wasn't the background character in her own life. She was the survivor, the protector, the one who ended the cycle, the one who walked out of 20 years of darkness and into a future she would build herself. And so the story ends with a question, not for Laura, but for the listener. When a man chooses to betray his family, he believes he's destroying the people around him. But in the end, he only destroys himself. If it were you, What would you say to a woman who has just stepped out of 20 years of shadow and finally into the light?